My name's Ethan Morales, and I've been working for TSA at Chicago O'Hare International Airport for about 6 years. Most people think we just scan bags and deal with cranky travelers, but I've seen things that'll haunt me for the rest of my life. I've debated telling anyone, but after what happened last month, I can't keep quiet. This isn't a story for the faint of heart. It all started on a late Tuesday night during a red-eye shift. I was at Checkpoint C, working the X-ray scanner. The airport was mostly quiet, just the hum of conveyor belts and distant announcements. I had a half-empty coffee cup in front of me and my earbuds in, playing some classic rock to keep me awake. The first bag that triggered my memory was unremarkable at first glance, a black Samsonite carry-on. But as soon as it went through the scanner, my stomach sank. The X-ray showed something that didn't make sense, a faint, irregular human outline, curled up in a fetal position. My first thought? It's a mannequin, right? Maybe someone trying to smuggle a life-size doll? I called over my colleague, Sandra, who's been with TSA for almost a decade. "Hey, check this out," I said, pointing at the screen. She leaned over, squinting. "That doesn't look right," she muttered. Her voice had that rare hesitation that made you pay attention. Most TSA vets get immune to weird scans over time, but something about this one made both of us uneasy. We followed protocol and flagged the bag for manual inspection. A couple of agents wheeled it over to the secondary area. We all wore gloves and masks, standard procedure, but that night I felt a chill crawling down my spine. The fluorescent lights made everything feel harsh and clinical, but even in that harsh light, something about the bag seemed off. It vibrated slightly, almost like it was alive. "Ethan, do you hear that?" Sandra whispered. At first I thought it was a joke, but then I realized the sound, a low, almost imperceptible thumping coming from inside the suitcase. We froze. Thump, thump, thump. We exchanged a glance and opened the zipper carefully. Nothing, just clothes, neatly folded, or at least they looked normal. But the thumping continued, now faster, sharper. It was like a heartbeat, rapid and irregular. Sandra grabbed a flashlight and shone it inside. That's when I saw it. A hand, pale, with unnaturally long fingers curling slightly around the edge of the suitcase. It vanished as soon as we looked at it directly. I swear on my life it wasn't a prank or some optical illusion. Both of us backed up. My hands were shaking. Sandra pulled out her radio to call for backup, but the signal was strangely weak. Only static came through, a low hum that seemed almost like whispering. A couple of senior TSA agents came over. Agent McAllister, a grizzled veteran, inspected the bag. He didn't say much, just frowned, reached in with his flashlight, and then his face went pale. He stepped back and said, I don't know what that is." We finally unzipped the full length of the suitcase. Inside, we found a bundle of cloth wrapped tightly, like someone had been rolled up inside. I reached in cautiously, and then froze. It wasn't just cloth, it was human skin, tattooed with markings I'd never seen before, almost tribal, almost occult. We called the airport police immediately. By the time they arrived, the suitcase was completely empty. Every trace of skin, cloth, and even the smell was gone. It was as if it had never existed. McAllister muttered, "This is impossible. It's gone." I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The security cameras in that area had gone offline for about 5 minutes during the incident. I reviewed the footage later. There was nothing. No one walking by, no bag being moved, nothing. Just a black void in the middle of the frame. That was only the beginning. Over the next few days, bags started showing anomalies more frequently. A rolling suitcase that moved on its own, a duffel bag that screamed when scanned, a backpack containing a toy that turned into a lifelike hand as soon as the scanner activated. By the end of that week, I was starting to feel paranoid. Every bag I scanned felt like it could contain something alive, something that shouldn't exist on Earth. I started keeping a personal log, writing down dates, times, bag descriptions, and anything unusual. Patterns emerged quickly. These bags mostly came from overnight international flights, particularly from small charter planes arriving in Chicago. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I was scanning a bag from a flight out of Miami. The X-ray revealed something unusual, A small, child-sized figure curled up, with glowing eyes staring straight at me from inside the suitcase. My heart stopped. I called Sandra over, and she looked at the screen, froze, and whispered, "What the hell is that?" I reached for the manual inspection tools, but the bag shook violently on its own, throwing our gloves to the floor. Something inside was moving. The small figure thrashed violently. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Silence. We carefully unzipped the bag. There was nothing inside, just a thin layer of mist curling up like smoke and a faint coldness that made the hair on my arms stand on end. That mist smelled faintly of decay. I called Agent McAllister again. He arrived, older and gruffer than ever, and saw the mist. He cursed under his breath and muttered something about never wanting to deal with this again. I began to understand. The TSA isn't just dealing with luggage. We were dealing with things that defy reality, things that shouldn't exist on Earth. By the end of Part 1, I had realized something terrifying. These bags weren't random. They were targeted. Whoever or whatever was placing these objects in luggage knew the passengers, the routes, and possibly even us. And that's when I first saw the note. Taped to the conveyor belt in neat, small handwriting, it said, "Don't open the next one. It watches you." I kept scanning, but my hands were trembling. That night, sleep eluded me. I had nightmares of bags opening themselves, spilling shadows onto the floor, and whispers filling the air. I knew this was just the beginning.
By the third week of working the red-eye shifts, the airport had become a waking nightmare. I could no longer distinguish between what was real and what was part of the bag's influence. It started with small movements. A backpack would slide a few inches down the conveyor belt, even without gravity acting on it. A briefcase would tip slightly, almost like it was nodding. Every night I noticed a pattern. The more fear I felt, the more the bags moved, reacted, and communicated. One flight from Dallas brought in a black suitcase with no ID tag. The X-ray showed a shadow of a person crouched inside, pressing against the walls. I called Sandra and we stared in horror. It wasn't human. Its proportions were off. Limbs too long, head too small, glowing faintly with a pale green light. When we moved it to the secondary inspection area, the bag pulled itself along the floor, almost as if it had a mind of its own. I grabbed it, trying to wrestle it into a bin. That's when I noticed tiny footprints appearing behind us, wet and muddy, although the floor was spotless. We unzipped the bag. Nothing, only darkness. But then came the whispering, "You're next." I froze. Sandra's radio fell from her hand. She looked pale, staring at the empty bag. Over the next hour, more bags began acting strangely. A carry-on from Chicago started vibrating violently. When we opened it, a thin, shadow-like figure leapt out and vanished into the ceiling tiles. A luggage from Miami had handprints pressing against the inside walls, appearing and disappearing as we watched. Even ordinary-looking suitcases now seemed alive. Clothes rearranged themselves. Pens rolled across the floor towards us. I began keeping a journal. I needed proof. But every time I attempted to record video or use my phone, the footage appeared corrupted, with strange static and blurred humanoid shapes that weren't visible to the naked eye. The final incident of the night came from a late flight from Seattle. A passenger had a suitcase that was clearly cursed, though we had no idea why. The X-ray revealed a tiny city inside, complete with streets, buildings, and miniature glowing figures walking the streets. When I unzipped it, the room inside expanded impossibly, like it was a portal. Sandra and I could hear distant screams, footsteps, and a faint heartbeat, all coming from within the bag. I swear I saw people, maybe passengers from other flights, trapped inside, waving at us helplessly before vanishing. I backed away, my heart pounding, my palms sweaty. This is wrong," I said. "This isn't luggage, it's another dimension." Then came the final, terrifying realization. The bags were learning from us. A plain gray suitcase began mimicking our movements. If I raised my hand, the bag shook in the same rhythm. If Sandra whispered, the bag's contents whispered back in distorted versions of our voices. I realized that these objects weren't just alive, they were sentient. They could manipulate reality around them, mirror us, even anticipate our fears. By the end of part 3, I was paranoid and exhausted. Every bag, every flight, every suitcase could be a trap. Even the security cameras seemed to record different events than what actually happened, as if the bags were rewriting history in real time. I knew I had to document everything, no matter the risk. I couldn't let these experiences be erased, not after what I had seen. And yet, the question remained, if these things were inside the bags, what about the passengers themselves?
By the third week of working the red-eye shifts, the airport had become a waking nightmare. I could no longer distinguish between what was real and what was part of the bag's influence. It started with small movements. A backpack would slide a few inches down the conveyor belt even without gravity acting on it. A briefcase would tip slightly, almost like it was nodding. Every night I noticed a pattern. The more fear I felt, the more the bags moved, reacted, and communicated. One flight from Dallas brought in a black suitcase with no ID tag. The X-ray showed a shadow of a person crouched inside, pressing against the walls. I called Sandra, and we stared in horror. It wasn't human. Its proportions were off. Limbs too long, head too small, glowing faintly with a pale green light. When we moved it to the secondary inspection area, the bag pulled itself along the floor, almost as if it had a mind of its own. I grabbed it, trying to wrestle it into a bin. That's when I noticed tiny footprints appearing behind us, wet and muddy, although the floor was spotless. We unzipped the bag. Nothing, only darkness. But then came the whispering, "You're next." I froze. Sandra's radio fell from her hand. She looked pale, staring at the empty bag. Over the next hour, more bags began acting strangely. A carry-on from Chicago started vibrating violently. When we opened it, a thin, shadow-like figure leapt out and vanished into the ceiling tiles. A luggage from Miami had handprints pressing against the inside walls, appearing and disappearing as we watched. Even ordinary-looking suitcases now seemed alive. Clothes rearranged themselves, pens rolled across the floor towards us. I began keeping a journal. I needed proof. But every time I attempted to record video or use my phone, the footage appeared corrupted, with strange static and blurred humanoid shapes that weren't visible to the naked eye. The final incident of the night came from a late flight from Seattle. A passenger had a suitcase that was clearly cursed, though we had no idea why. The X-ray revealed a tiny city inside, complete with streets, buildings, and miniature glowing figures walking the streets. When I unzipped it, the room inside expanded impossibly, like it was a portal. Sandra and I could hear distant screams, footsteps, and a faint heartbeat, all coming from within the bag. I swear I saw people, maybe passengers from other flights, trapped inside, waving at us helplessly, before vanishing. I backed away, my heart pounding, my palms sweaty. This is wrong, I said. This isn't luggage. It's another dimension. Then came the final, terrifying realization. The bags were learning from us. A plain gray suitcase began mimicking our movements. If I raised my hand, the bag shook in the same rhythm. If Sandra whispered, the bag's contents whispered back in distorted versions of our voices. I realized that these objects weren't just alive, they were sentient. They could manipulate reality around them, mirror us, even anticipate our fears. By the end of part 3, I was paranoid and exhausted. Every bag, every flight, every suitcase could be a trap. Even the security cameras seemed to record different events than what actually happened, as if the bags were rewriting history in real time. I knew I had to document everything, no matter the risk. I couldn't let these experiences be erased, not after what I had seen. And yet, the question remained.
If these things were inside the bags, what about the passengers themselves?
By the fourth week, the airport had become a nightmare I couldn't escape. I could feel it in the air the moment I walked into the security area. The fluorescent lights flickered strangely, shadows stretched unnaturally, and the conveyor belts seemed to hum in a low, menacing tone. Every suitcase, every bag, every backpack I touched throbbed with energy I couldn't explain. It started subtly at first. A traveler's small carry-on would vibrate slightly, as if pulsing in rhythm with our own heartbeat. Then came the whispers, faint, distorted voices, echoing from within the luggage, repeating words we had never said, but sometimes phrases we had just thought. Sandra and I began noticing that bags were coordinating with each other. Two unrelated suitcases would move in tandem, bumping against each other to form patterns on the floor. Sometimes they would form crude symbols like ancient runes or letters, almost like a language we weren't meant to understand. Then it happened. A passenger arrived from Denver, an elderly woman with a large, old leather suitcase. When it hit the X-ray, the machine freaked out. Sparks flew, alarms screamed, and the monitor flickered violently. We opened the bag cautiously. Inside, a humanoid form crouched, eyes glowing red. It was alive, but impossibly small. It whispered directly into our minds, "Take us with you, or leave us, and you'll regret it." I staggered back, heart pounding. Sandra grabbed a metal rod for protection, and the bag shuddered violently, slamming itself shut. Then it sprang to life, rolling across the floor faster than any human could move. It crashed into other bags, creating a chain reaction. Luggage began throwing themselves, spilling contents that shouldn't exist, like ancient bones, books that screamed, and glowing objects hovering in midair. Passengers nearby were oblivious, either asleep or in some trance-like state, unaware of the chaos around them. But to us, it was clear. The bags weren't just alive. They were hunting us. A medium-sized black duffel bag from Chicago lunged at Sandra. Its zipper unzipped midair, and a black mist poured out, taking shape into twisted versions of past passengers, people who had gone missing over the last month. Their eyes glowed a sickly yellow, mouths whispering in a chorus of threats. I tried to intervene. I grabbed a scanner and aimed it at the duffel. It screamed, a sound that wasn't mechanical but painful to the soul, and recoiled. I realized that these objects fed a fear. The more terrified we became, the stronger they got. A huge checked bag from Seattle then tipped over in the corner. Its contents spilled, dozens of small, grotesque figurines, each one moving independently. They climbed onto the conveyor belt and scuttled towards us, their tiny eyes reflecting a malicious intelligence. We ran. I don't remember how we made it to the main hall. The lights flickered, X-ray machines sparked, and every bag we had previously scanned seemed to be converging towards us. There were screams, not just from the bags, but from passengers who weren't supposed to exist, people who had disappeared months ago, now trapped in some kind of liminal space between reality and luggage. Sandra shouted, "We have to get the alarms active, get the fire suppression system." I reached the panel, but the controls warped in my hands. The buttons changed position, labels rearranging themselves. The bags were interfering with reality, bending the airport's physics to their will. A small child's suitcase rolled directly towards me. It opened to reveal a miniature of me inside, screaming silently, mouthing words I couldn't hear. I screamed and slammed it shut, but I knew it had copied my essence. And then the worst. A giant cargo bag, bigger than any checked luggage we had ever seen, rose into the air. It hovered, slowly spinning. The X-ray revealed a full-sized human figure with my face strapped inside, alive but paralyzed. I staggered back. My reflection was in the metal panel, and I could see the bag staring at me, mocking me. We had no choice but to flee. Sandra grabbed a radio, calling for backup, but the messages came distorted, full of static and voices repeating our names. As we ran towards the emergency exit, the luggage pursued us, rolling, flying, and sometimes floating silently behind us, like predators stalking their prey.
Passengers continued to sleep, oblivious, or watched us silently with blank expressions, never intervening. Finally, we made it to the hangar area. Planes were still, but the runway lights flickered, casting long, unnatural shadows. I realized the bags had spread beyond the terminal. We weren't safe anywhere. Even outside, a small suitcase crawled along the asphalt, moving faster than any human could run. We barricaded ourselves inside the hangar office. There, I found a suitcase that wasn't even on our flight manifest, sitting in the corner. Its surface shimmered like liquid, reflecting our deepest fears, losing our minds, losing our loved ones, disappearing forever. Sandra whispered, "We can't leave. We can't call anyone. They'll never believe us." I noted. I knew she was right. And as we sat there, surrounded by luggage that could think, move, and manipulate reality, I understood the truth. Once these things choose you, there is no escaping. They're not just luggage, they're predators, and we're the prey. By the end of Part 4, we were trapped, unsure whether help would ever arrive. And worst of all, I noticed a small note taped to the outside of a suitcase, written in a hand I recognized but had never seen. "You can't hide forever. We are inside you now."
By the time we reached the hangar office, Sandra and I were beyond exhaustion. Adrenaline had pushed us through fear, but the lingering dread was crushing. Every suitcase, bag, and duffel seemed to pulse with intent, as if they were conscious, waiting for the right moment to strike. The office was small, sterile, and yet impossibly suffocating. Each corner hid shadows that weren't ours, and the overhead fluorescent lights flickered sporadically. We barricaded the door, stacked chairs and metal poles, but even as we did, I could feel the luggage breathing, alive, sentient. Sandra whispered, almost to herself, "We need to understand what they want. There's a pattern, something tying this all together." I nodded, flipping through the X-ray images on the computer. That's when I noticed it. Every suitcase contained not just objects, but fragments of people, memories, or essences. Some had bones, some had shapes that resembled shadows of the soul, and others, worse. Others looked like distorted versions of our colleagues who had disappeared over the last few months. A suitcase trembled in the corner. Slowly its zipper unzipped, revealing a dim red light from inside. The bag's surface seemed to stretch, almost breathing. A voice, faint, familiar but twisted, echoed through the room. "You shouldn't have come here. You belong with us now." Sandra and I froze. The voice wasn't coming from the bag alone. It was inside our heads. I realized then that they could manipulate perception, invade thought, and bend reality. We grabbed the nearest metal rods and shields. The suitcases began to move on their own, rolling and sliding, spinning like mini tornadoes of darkness. The floor vibrated under their weight. One bag lunged toward me. I swung the rod. It went through the bag like water, but I felt a jolt in my chest, as if my soul had been touched. A massive cargo bag from Seattle floated into the center of the office. Inside, I could see a distorted version of myself, screaming silently, eyes wide with terror. I wanted to look away, but something forced me to lock eyes with it. The reflection mouthed words I could understand now. "You cannot survive without confronting me. Face it, or be consumed." I realized then that this was the true horror. These weren't just cursed objects. They were manifestations of fear, memory, and essence, feeding on human attention and terror. Every time I panicked, they grew stronger. Sandra and I exchanged a glance. We had no weapons to fight them physically. The only option was mental fortitude, focus, and refusal to give in to fear. I took a deep breath. The bag surged forward, but I centered myself. I imagined a wall of light around me, a protective boundary. To my shock, the bags recoiled slightly, hissing like molten metal. Sandra followed suit, and together we created a zone of resistance, slowing their advance. But it wasn't enough. From the corner of the room, a small child's suitcase rolled forward rapidly. It opened to reveal a miniature version of Sandra crying and reaching for her. Sandra staggered, almost broke her focus. I shouted, "Don't let them make you doubt reality."
The bags lunged again, combining into a swirling mass, almost like a dark tornado. I realized we needed to break their connection to our minds. My hands hovered over the terminal, trying to access the security override. If I could trigger a full terminal lockdown, maybe we could trap the luggage in containment areas, cutting off their ability to feed on human fear. As I worked, a massive black duffel bag loomed over us. Its zipper opened to reveal dozens of glowing humanoid eyes staring directly at us. It screamed, a sound that shook the very walls. Sandra grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed the bag, but it didn't react to the foam. Instead, the mist seemed to strengthen the bag, giving it even more mass. I realized we needed to attack their connection to our perception, not them physically. I closed my eyes and forced myself to focus on a single thought: survival, clarity, and refusal to succumb to fear. The buzzing, whispering, and shadows around us began to fade slightly, as if the bags were recoiling from our combined willpower. Suddenly, the office door exploded inward. More bags rolled in, checked luggage from flights we hadn't even serviced that day. Panic surged, but Sandra and I held the mental line, forcing ourselves to remain calm. I shouted, "We have to trap them! The containment area!" We ran through the hangar, leading the luggage toward the industrial storage section. They followed, but their movements slowed, as if the corridor itself resisted them. Reaching the containment zone, I activated the emergency magnetic locks. The bags screamed in unison, a sound that vibrated the very air, yet we stood firm. One last massive duffel, glowing red, tried to escape. Sandra shouted, "Push it in!" Together, we forced it into the containment chamber. The locks activated, the sound screamed into silence, and the lights flickered back to normal. We collapsed, trembling, exhausted. Outside, the airport was eerily quiet, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. We had delayed them, trapped them temporarily. Somewhere in the world, another suitcase would awaken, another duffel would whisper, another bag would pulse with the essence of lost souls. And as we sat in the hangar, panting, I saw a small note taped to the inside of the containment door, written in blood-red ink. "You cannot contain fear forever. It grows in every heart it touches." I looked at Sandra. She nodded grimly. We were survivors, yes, but survivors of something that would never truly die. We walked back toward the terminal, knowing we would never fly a night flight again, never trust luggage, never forget the voices whispering from inside every suitcase, duffel, and bag we had ever scanned. And deep in the corner of my mind, I knew the truth. The luggage waits. It is patient, and one day, it will find you.